VikesNow, I am Dustin Baker. We are here late on a Saturday night, probably Sunday by the time you guys and gals view this episode. We are right in the heart of rookie minicamp and about 3 weeks away from mandatory minicamp when things will really start to get off the ground. So we're going through every single detail about the 2024 Vikings. That's on our agenda. We have Tom. He's a guy that I am friends with on Twitter, and I thought, you know what? I want to talk to that guy. And now we see him in the flesh. Tom, how are you this weekend?
All doing well. Yeah, just having a great weekend. Actually went over to Minnesota just last night and got back this afternoon. So ready to talk some Vikings with you. Looking forward to it. Been looking
Awesome.
forward to it all week here.
Sweet. Well, that's fantastic. We were lamenting off air the Timberwolves gaffe, but we also conceded that you probably weren't going to sweep the champs. So they have a chance to rebound on Mother's Day. They better win that game. Otherwise, if it gets even Steven, all bets are off. The Nuggets will probably do Nuggets thing. But as I always say, this is Vikes now, not Wolves now. We're going to jump right into it. Before that, Brevin, how are you, sir?
Oh, good. I'm great now. I was telling you guys pre-show I've been sick for the last week. So anybody that has watched any form of content of Bikes Now, whether it's Bikes Now or Social Network, that I've been a part of since like last Saturday, sorry. I was just so out of it. I barely knew my own name the last week. I was so sick. So but yeah, I'm good now.
All right, we got a rebound episode coming from Brev right now. So I'm going to start with the questions for Tom. And this one I formulated because it intrigues me and I want to get your take. So Kwesi Adofo-Mensah loves to trade with other teams, whether it's draft picks or acquiring players. It usually involve draft picks. So that's his MO. That's what he does, more so than Trader Rick, who worked with the Vikings for 16 years. But here's the problem. The Vikings draft capital piggy bank is pretty barren after the move to acquire Dallas Turner in the draft. But let's assume for this question, Tom, that the Vikings do make a trade this summer because Kwesi can't help himself. What kind of trade would that be?
Well, and you kind of mentioned it right off the rip there. I don't really see him to kind of change your question just a bit. I
That's okay.
don't see him making a trade really this offseason prior to the start of the year. I think 2024-25 is going to be mostly a setup year, not really a reset, but the reloading with bringing in McCarthy, bringing in Turner, already selling off those pieces to get those two guys.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't really see him with the lack of ammunition in picks for next year really being able to bring in any heavy hitters. And I would assume they're mostly just going to reset, develop McCarthy, and build 425 where they got a bunch of cap space to bring in free agents and then have, a lot of capital in 2026 to swing some trades. The one move I could potentially, think they might make is if talks break down with Jefferson over the summer and they can't come to any sort of contract agreement, which I wouldn't expect.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, I don't have any sources or anything like that to, tell me anything like that. But, if talks were to break down, potentially they move off of him for at minimum 2 firsts and a younger player. But I really wouldn't see him swinging any trades this offseason.
Yeah, if they wanted to get a little bit deeper wherever on the depth chart, it might be one of those trades that are coming really popular where you just trade a conditional 6th or 7th rounder to somewhere like they did for Dobbs. It seems like every team does that now, which is kind of cool because it's so low risk. What about outgoing? Let's assume that for this question that somebody, Tom, is trade did between Lewis Seen, Andrew Booth, maybe Nick Mullins because they have a lot of cooks in the kitchen at quarterback. Who would be an outgoing player that you'd be like, oh, they traded him? That kind of makes sense.
Yeah, like you said, Nick Mullins would potentially be a guy that I could see him move off of. Even potentially, I know they just brought him in, but Sam Darnold too.
Mm-hmm.
If they just don't like what they see in camp, now that they've got McCarthy, the thought could be maybe they brought him in just to potentially mask the idea that they might be trading up for a QB. So either Darnold or Mullins, more likely than not Mullins, just because I don't think he cut bait on Jaron Hall that quickly. as the developmental third guy. But that wouldn't surprise me if they would have managed to move Mullins for a fifth or a sixth, seventh, anything like that.
Yeah, they notably got him 2 summers ago for, was it a sixth or a sixth or seventh? Was it one of those conditional six? I can't remember, but it was a late rounder. Brevin, what about you? Let's say it's mandatory that Kwesi has to make a trade this summer. What will that be?
I mean, I think it would be along the realms of not even a role player, but I think Tom kind of hit well on with the quarterbacks, like even if it's Jaron Hall, because there's just not going to be that many rooms or rooms. There's not going to be that many room for what am I saying right now? There's not going to be much room for quarterbacks in the quarterback room for the Minnesota Vikings in 2024. So with that being said, and I actually wrote an article on Purple PTSD about this. I had Jaron Hall was the odd man out, just because I think you have Mullins. I think you want somebody that knows the offense in and out. Of course, you have Darnold. He'll have an entire offseason in the offense, so he'll know it. And then McCarthy's going to be grasping NFL level concepts at this point in his young NFL career. That's been his career for 2 weeks. Now, I think you could see Jaron Hall. I don't know if a team would offer legitimate capital for him. And when I'm saying capital, I'm meaning like a 7th round pick in 2026 or 2027. So that would be the one I'd guess if Kwesi can be like, hey, I got a project for you. But I guess that would kind of be that. You look around the roster, there's really not. I like what Kwesi's building, but there's really not that many things to trade right now.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess quarterbacks would kind of be the easy one, unless somebody's in love with one of the running backs, or if somebody's in love with CJ Ham. Take CJ Ham off our hands, maybe. I don't know.
Mine would be, with the gun to my head, there's going to be a trade. I would probably predict Lewis Cine, and not because I'm out on him or as obsessed with coining him as a bust like a lot of the world is. It's because the safety room as it is, with or without him, is well established. And with Andrew Booth, for instance, he could have a wicked sweet summer and reasonably be the starting cornerback on the outside. Scene, even if he's a badass, he's still sitting behind 3 or 4 dudes that aren't going to give up snaps. So I don't know if seeing what he would fetch, maybe if we're lucky, a 6th rounder. It really hurts his stock, I think, in a trade that he had the gruesome, leg injury. But I'm with you guys that unlike summers past or Kwesi in general, we're probably unlikely to see a trade. But I get a just itch that they're going to do something, because Kwesi always does. Brevin, what else you got for Tom? First time guest from Wisconsin.
Yeah, so and you alluded to the Justin Jefferson, like if that'd be crazy if negotiations broke down, but luckily I think Justin Jefferson will be a Viking in 2024 and going forward. With that, the schedule's not out, but we do have the list of opponents. And you are not allowed to say Atlanta because of Kirk. If you are going to say Atlanta, you're suspended from VikesNow indefinitely. But what is one, or you can give me a couple games, but what's a game that you're really looking forward to in 2024 for your and my Minnesota Vikings?
Oh, I think top of my list would be the Colts game there at the bank. I was a really big proponent of moving up to get Anthony Richardson last year. As soon as I saw the 3rd pick get traded, I lost my mind thinking that the Vikings were going to be moving up. I'd really just love to get in and see him in person at US Bank Stadium, get to see him play. And I think it could be a pretty damn competitive game too, especially if it's later on in the year, November, December, and McCarthy potentially is starting at that point. I think it could be really fun to see 2 guys that I think are going to be the future of the league, wheeling and dealing, duking it out to just be the top dog there. Apart from that, I'd say Jets is going to be a pretty fun one. Get to play against Aaron Rodgers again, hopefully stick it to him one last time before he is likely gone. And they play the Niners, if I'm remembering right, too. I don't have the list of home opponents, but I think they play him at the bank. I think that's going to be another really fun one. Just whoever's at QB, if it's Darnold getting some revenge, or if McCarthy's in at that point. I think that could be a fun one to see, two what should be high-powered offenses going at it.
It's kind of hard to find an easy game on this schedule if you assume all the other teams' quarterbacks will be healthy, which won't happen. Somebody will go down. But the one that I enjoy is at the Rams, and it's for a couple reasons because it's Minty versus Minter and McVay and O'Connell. I should have said those in reverse order. O'Connell versus McVay. And anytime you go to a Los Angeles sports stadium, the other team usually has some semblance of home field advantage. And so, if Vikings fans go there, it'll be one of those games where it's like, hey, half the crowd is purple. And so I'd be interested to see how O'Connell does against his old boss. And then my one of my speeches on here that I get frequently is I really like Matthew Stafford's game, but whenever the Vikings play Matthew Stafford, he never scares me one bit. Like, and maybe it was just the Lions aura from 12 seasons, whatever it was. But I always respect how good Stafford is, especially in pressure cooked moments. But whenever he's on the docket to play the Vikings, I'm always like, he's pretty decent. Oh, well. And so I know what that feeling's like. So having all of those factors at the Rams, I think will be a good barometer of how the season's going, assuming that it happens sometime in November, December. Brevin, do you got one? That's not the Kirk game that you've circled?
Not really. Like, I was actually just looking at it and I was like, wow, the schedule's kind of boring for the most part. I don't know. I kind of agree with you with the Rams thing, with O'Connell and McVay going at it. Those West Coast games, like not Seattle, which is actually my least favorite game on here because I would bet any amount of money that's going to be a Monday night game for no reason, just because it's a Vikings game in Seattle, just to spite me. I don't know, or spite us as Vikings fans, but I don't know. I like the vibes are always high for those like California games because we always, I guess any team can say it, but your fan base is going to show up.
Mm-hmm.
So like Rams games, Chargers games, Raiders games, those ones are always ones I kind of look forward to just because it's kind of a pseudo home game, and that's especially important this year since one of our home games is in London. Something about the Texans game is giving me high vibes, I guess, again, for lack of a better term. And then I'm excited to play I don't know if it's a cop out. I'm excited to play the division this year. You kind of see where we're at. I wouldn't be shocked at all if we come last in the division, so I don't know really what I'm looking forward to, but I don't know. It'd just be cool to get a good division record while we're like at our weakest that we will be for the next foreseeable future.
One other thing about the schedule that I enjoy is if you follow the usual sentiment that the Vikings on the road aren't that great. Last year they weren't good at home. Can't figure that one out. But usually they're good at home and mid or bad on the road. This year, after the obvious NFC North opponents, some of the games on the road aren't like, oh my God, what are we going to do? At the Giants, if you can get over the Seahawks stigma, at the Titans and at the Jaguars, those should be games that it's like, you know what? The Vikings can go there and contend if they, look like, McCarthy's doing the thing or Darnold has done his Baker Mayfield story. A lot of times I'm thinking about the season and I still have this thing in my Vikings brain where I'm like, all right, they're gonna be in contention because they're always 7-6 by December 1st. But I'm like, no shit, this is a transformational year. They're not gonna be in the mix. And so I have to pump the brakes on myself a lot because we're ingrained in the last decade that the Vikings are always at least semi-serious about being all in for a Super Bowl, and that may not be the case this year, especially if Darnold is Darnold and McCarthy takes a while to get going. The next thing that I have for you, Tom, is we've talked about this a lot, but I think it's really apropos with mandatory minicamp not far away. What's the spot on the roster that gives you heartburn that you're like, yeah, because there's one for every team, and I want to know what it is for the Vikings.
I'd say kind of not to be really creative, but the interior offensive line, that's, kind of always been an issue. It's improved the past few years. Ed Ingram's taken a bit of a step up. Bradbury's definitely taken a step up from where he was when he was originally drafted. But that left guard spot worries me now too, without having Reisner back and what we're relying on. I think Blake Brandel, if I'm remembering right now, to kind of fill in that spot. It leaves your depth at tackle pretty weak if you're having Brandel starting at left guard. And I'd just like to see him bring in at least one more piece for a guard spot, or even maybe replacing Bradbury at center, even though he's been improved. If you bring in like Connor Williams out of free agency, the old Dolphins center, he was one of the top guys. You bring him in, maybe even move Bradbury for some fifth round pick or just something to get a little bit extra capital for next year, or maybe swing a trade then in the off season.
Mm-hmm.
Apart from that, I mean, linebacker depth seems to be sorted out pretty well with this free agency they just had. Safeties, they're fully set, I would think. They don't need anybody there. Outside of Jefferson and Addison, I suppose wide receiver kind of worries me, and obviously cornerback then on the defensive side again.
This is a lot of shit.
But yeah, I mean, it's not massive worries. I shouldn't say
Yeah.
that, but the interior of the offensive line is the biggest thing, and then
Mhm.
just depth at cornerback and wide receiver are really things I'd like to see him address somewhat with some of these remaining free agents.
Yeah, I think most Vikings fans, because basically it's in our blood to be worried about the offensive guard spot from the last, I keep saying, decade. One thing I noticed, and this was on accident, and it gave me a little bit of enthusiasm, is last weekend I was doing my homework on an article about possible landing spots for Dalton Reisner, since the Vikings just evidently don't want to get back. A lot of good football teams kind of skimp over guards. San Francisco 49ers, their guards aren't that good. The Miami Dolphins, they're on the list. Their guards aren't that good. The Eagles have a hole at right guard, I believe. Let's see, the Bills probably need one better guard. And you start looking at those teams and I'm like, well, those sons of bitches are usually finishing 11-6, 12-5. So not to say like, hey, these other teams are doing it so the Vikings can get by with some turnstile, but I don't know. Maybe there's something about a play caller that's like, you know what? I have this offensive lineman that I want to do this, and therefore I don't need to have like somebody with a 92 PFF, because a lot of good teams have what we perceive as a deficiency at offensive guard. Now, that's just a speech of best case scenario for the Blake Brandel experiment, and I too hope Ed Ingram takes the next step. And then it's worth noting that this is a contract year for Garrett Bradbury, so whether he's traded like Tom suggested could happen, or this could be his last hurrah. Because there's a handful of free agents, and Bradbury's probably at the top of the list per familiarity. So offensive line, interior offensive line, man, we've been saying that one. Gosh, like my entire 30s, pretty much. I turned 40 not long ago. Let's see.
Well, actually, if I could just jump in and say one more thing. I guess the other thing that could improve it is a bit more mobility in a guy like McCarthy, as opposed to the more statue pocket passer that Kirk was, just getting up there in age, and especially after the injury, I think getting that extra mobility at the quarterback spot could also help improve the guard position as well.
Yeah, and I think that is we like a lot of the anti-Kirk crowd started asking for a mobile quarterback about 5 years ago, and I think that is the mentality behind it. Is, hey, we've resigned to our fate that they're never going to be a wonderful offensive line, so we might as well get somebody who can dance a little bit. And if there's one thing about McCarthy, it's that he can dance, and some of his sweetest highlights are working off script, which is what Kwesi Adofo-Mensah said 2 months ago, that that's what he wanted in his next quarterback. All right, Brev, next thing for Tom.
Gun to your head. Your life on the line. 5 players on the Vikings, your top 5. And you have to get it correct. I don't know who the judge of it is, but you have to get it correct. Rank your top 5. And I think this would be interesting for all of us to do, just to see how similar they are. But give me your top 5 players, and I hope it's right. I don't know what's
Chalk.
right, but it just sounds funny.
Yep. No, chalk number 1, Justin Jefferson.
Boom.
That's no brainer. Yeah. Yeah, I know. I'm really going on a limb with that one there. But yeah, JJ number 1. 2, I'm going kind of mainstream with it, but CD, Darisaw is just a beast on the left side of the line. You can't really ask for much of a better left tackle than Christian Darisaw. 3, I'll throw out Josh Metellus. I think just his unique style of playing football, his versatility, and his utility all around the field. He's kind of becoming. Don't want to throw him yet into the air of Harrison Smith, but he's becoming kind of that gadget guy that you can move all around the field and know that he's going to do the right thing. And as Harrison Smith's just gotten older and kind of taken a step back from what he used to be, even 3, 4, 5 years ago, I think it's nice to see Metellus able to step up kind of in that rover role and really step into being a on-field coach. And then 5.
I think you skipped 4.
Or did I say? Yeah, this is 4. Never mind. I swear I can count here. It's that Wisconsin water. Yeah, 4. I'd throw out. Honestly, Brian O'Neill. I mean, the bookend tackles on the line are really something for the Vikings. It's this iteration since maybe the early 2010s, late 2000s is the best iteration of a Vikings offensive line that I can remember ever watching play.
Pretty much since Bryant McKinney left.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so it's nice having 2 guys that I'd consider probably top 5 on the roster protecting the new QB here coming up. And then after that, 5, obviously with Hunter gone, he's not there anymore, and we haven't seen what Grenard's going to be in this defensive scheme. I think he'll be good, but just based off of what he showed last year, I got to throw Addison out there. I think he's just phenomenal, a nice rising star that's going to take an even better step this year and be able to really grow and develop alongside McCarthy.
What I loved about Addison was a couple of just the holy shit catches that he turned into touchdowns, like obviously the 49ers one where he just basically forced a fumble to score a touchdown. He just took it away. And then the one against the Bengals when the game was going pear-shaped that he scooped off the ground and was like, hey, I'm just going to dance 35 more yards and score. I don't know if you did this on the fly, Brev, but I did real quick. I have Jefferson at the top. Doesn't need a caption. Christian Darrisaw, we need to get that man to the Pro Bowl at number 2. Number 3 for me, even though he probably won't play right away, is TJ Hawkinson for the duality of what he does in catching the ball and blocking. Number 4 is Jonathan Grenard, although he probably needs 1 more year with double-digit sacks to deserve this, but I think he will get that. And then number 5 for me is Brian O'Neill because of the speech that Tom gave. And then right on the cutoff, I'd have Addison. I just have to make sure there's no sophomore slump. I don't think that'll happen, but those things do happen. And I hope that doesn't happen to a Vikings player. So I'd have Jefferson, Darrisaw, Hawkinson, Grenard, and O'Neill, unless I egregiously forgot somebody on the fly. Revan, did you come up with them or nah?
Yeah, I did mine more kind of like, I guess, right this moment. I thought about doing with some projection. If I had projection with it, I'd probably put Addison or Grenard in the top 5. But I have Jefferson, Darrisaw, O'Neill, Hawkinson, Aaron Jones.
Okay.
And Aaron Jones just because of what he's been able to do. And again, I think that's like the ultimate non-projection pick, just what he's proved in the NFL already. And in terms of, I think the value he's going to bring to the team, it's going to pay tenfold. I honestly thought about switching him and Hawkinson, honestly, truthfully, just because I won't dive too deep into that. But I love TJ Hawkinson, but just thinking of impact, and Hawkinson does a lot for the offense, but I don't know, Jones is just going to add that extra layer, and they're all going to benefit from each other at the end of the day. But I like the shout for Josh Metellus from Tom. He's kind of my outside looking in, like with Addison and Grenard. But yeah, I mean, once you get past those 7 names, you're like, ooh.
Yeah, we used to have about, I can tell you personally, because later this early summer, I'll write a list of like 10 best players on the Vikings. Usually that's tricky because you get to 10, you're like, ooh, do I put Harrison Smith at this age on there? Yeah, I probably do. But like you just said, you get to 5 after that, you're like, oh, Ivan Pace, baby. So that's probably why we all foresee like a 7-10 or 8-9 season at best, is because we have like 5 or 6 impact players, whereas during the peak of the Zimmer era or even 2022, you usually would be hard pressed to situate 8, 9, 10. I think that's a statement of where we're at. One thing I really like about Aaron Jones, and I don't know that I've given this little spiel on this show. I am the kind of guy that when my phone buzzes and says, hey, we just signed a 29-year-old running back, I'd be like, oh, why? That's usually how I'd rest on my laurels and say, that's not going to work. But what I do like about the Aaron Jones move is somebody in that TCO Performance Center realized that running the ball matters and it has to be fixed. There is this paranoia that I have about Kevin O'Connell. When he was hired, I cynically thought, God, I hope we don't turn into that, like, from my teen years or 20s when we just were an offense first team that didn't care about defense. But the problem is if you're going to be an offense first team, you also have to run the ball a little bit and not be near the bottom of the league every year per efficiency. So when we entered this offseason, I think there was probably a temptation to say, hey, Ty Chandler looked good in 2 games. We can just roll with him again. And that would have been more of the same in thinking, well, if it works out with Chandler, then we'll probably be in the middle of the pack with our running game. But when you get Aaron Jones, that shows we mean business. We know we have a problem. And I was paranoid that they weren't going to realize it because it's a former quarterback. Of course, he wants to throw the ball a lot more than he runs it. But I am here to tell you, Brevin's heard me say this before, O'Connell's offense will never fully cook unless they can run the ball. And it's just the way the world works. You don't have to do it like, run more than you pass or anything of the sort, but you have to be able to move the sticks when you're up 21-3 and just close out an opponent. And we have seen, in our bones, the Vikings can't do that against the Saints last year. Pretty much every game Kevin O'Connell's ever coached. They get a nice little lead, and that son of a bitch is coming back, and it's going to be a 1-score victory. So I'm glad that they took strides to say, you know what, we need to get better rushing the football. And just going with Madison and Chandler and hoping for the best, that's not going to do the trick. So we're going to get, a guy who's been to a Pro Bowl or 2 in Aaron Jones. All right, Tom, you got any closing arguments for us?
Well, I guess I'd just say I think you're right on the filling out the top 10. The last 8, 9, 10 slots are going to be difficult. And it's just a lack of depth on the roster, really, at the end of the day. I don't think they're going to be a terrible team. I think the Vikings are going to wind up around 500. It really does hinge on how fast McCarthy develops and what his peak can be that he can reach this season. I will say just one thing with the top 10 list, it always the past few seasons, really, it always got on my nerves when people would just list off, oh, well, we've got Jefferson and Thielen and Harrison Smith and Dalvin Cook and all these pieces. And it's like, okay, that's great when you look at the depth chart, but they've never been able to put it together. They could never, you go 13-4, and that was a phenomenal season. Just a phenomenal year to watch. Just a movie from start to finish.
It was.
And a horror ending, too. But I'm hoping that even though we might have a smaller list of top-of-the-line names that we can rattle off here, I'm just hoping that they can, with the help of O'Connell, put all the pieces together and maybe not this year, probably not this year, but within the next 2 or 3 seasons, actually make a godforsaken serious run at bringing all of us fans a championship.
Yeah, that's I think the most immediate example is the Houston Texans. I kid you not, on a couple shows last summer, I was criticizing the Texans. I was like, well, they probably have the least dynamic playmaking core in the league, so they're just going to hope it works with Stroud. And then I was wrong. They have one of the most dynamic. And then they added Diggs. And I don't know how much of that is Stroud making it look dazzling or them making Stroud. But that would be the holy grail, that the turnaround is as fast as the Texans, because it's coming. And we get to July and August, the Texans are going to be everybody's trendy pick to be like the Lions, that, hey, the Texans are going to be an AFC championship. And so that would be the model. The Bills did it similarly with their competitive rebuild back in 2016, 17 into 18 when Josh Allen started to emerge. That one took a little bit longer, but I think that is, either one of those scenarios, we'll take it. And the hinge, as you talked about, is McCarthy, whether or not he's good. And then on those lists, a lot of those top 10 lists, like per team or for the Vikings, they end up being lifetime achievement awards. Because even I feel if I was going to make my top 10, I'd feel slimy not to have Harrison Smith in it. But I don't know if he probably is a top 10 player on these Vikings. But a lot of my bias is because, God, this dude's been around for 12 years now. And like how great it look. Remember how he played against the Panthers? That was like the best game of his career. And he was 33, 34 years old. Brevin, any closing arguments before we log off for the weekend?
Yep, 2 quick things. I just want to say I completely lied about my top 5 Vikings players. It's actually Ryan Wright, Nick Mullins, John Parker Romo, Tristan Jackson, and Caleb Evans. And also,
where's Johnny Munt?
He's 6th. He was right in front of Theo Jackson. But other second thing, thinking or listening to you, Dustin, talk about the lack of a run game we've had, it's really weird. As Vikings fans, it's really weird to think like we don't have a run game. I don't know. It just made me like reflect on my life.
Yeah.
My entire life cheering for the Vikings. I'm like, we had it pretty good. And now you don't have a run game. You're going Adrian Peterson's your running back for a while, and then you go to Dalvin Cook. You're like, hey, this is nice. And suddenly Alexander Madison is who you're leaning on. So I don't know. I'm glad to have Aaron Jones here, and maybe we should just take the fact that we get really good running backs and receivers, just take that with a grain of salt, I guess, because then one day you're going to be trying to watch Alexander Madison navigate the offensive line on a 3rd and 1, and you really think about it all then.
Well, what happened was you grew accustomed to that style of living as a fan. Adrian, obviously, like probably the best running back I'll ever see just with my eyes. And then Dalvin Cook was a step down, but he was still elite in terms of his Pro Bowl performance. And then after that, I think we got hoodwinked into thinking, we knew it was going to come to an end. It really doesn't care who the running back's going to be. And that's kind of what this new era of football has said. And if you want to employ somewhat anonymous running backs, well, you got to at least be good with those running backs. You can't just have – we went from having 3rd and 1 saying, oh, this will be a piece of cake for what, 14 years with AP and Cook. And now we're like, oh, shit, it's 3rd and 1. What are we going to do? We're going to do that tush-push thing, are we? So we went from just majesty – to poverty. And so now I think the rest of the group, Vikings fans, are coming back to saying, like, you know what? We should be at least decent at doing this. We know it's a pass happy era. And I'm one of those fans that says you gotta be in the middle of the road, 16th best in rushing the football. Otherwise, the rest of the offense is gonna suck, especially when you get to the postseason, because you can't just not run the football in the postseason, as much of a boomer as I sound to saying that. All right, Tom, thanks for coming on. Is your Twitter is @Skol from WI, is that correct?
Yep, just like it's on there. Yep.
All right, perfect. Well, we do this, Brev and I, every Saturday. It'll probably end up being Friday nights when the season starts because of my travel schedule going up to games and shit. I got to go to bed early. But we want to have you back, so you let me know sometime, maybe June or July, when a good date is for you, all right?
Yeah, perfect. I will definitely keep in contact with you on that.
All right, awesome, man. Nice to meet you. And Brev, we will see you sometime next week, okay?
Absolutely.
All right, later, guys.
Later.
Take it easy.